Today is April 20th, 2001, and we are in Ixtapa, Mexico, and it is a family gathering, which originally came out of a get-together for the Illsley family for a wedding, and then they thought it'd be nice to have another get-together, and this time Helen and I, in the last minute, realized we were going to be able to join, and we felt this time we would like to gather a bit of family history, to have the three brothers together. We have decided on this first time in about 25 years that the three of us have been together, and we want to share some of our early childhood experiences. We all know that these three boys have done some stupid things, unusual, maybe historic things. History's both good and bad. We've done spectacular things, but what is lacking is an understanding of the family relationship. And we want to focus a little bit on that today. I picked up a book some months ago, To Our Children's Children, Preserving Family Histories for Generations to Come. And in here, there are pages and pages and pages of questions to be asked of by the younger generation of their parents. I have read the questions, and I recognize that this is really kind of designed for families where the parents didn't do very much and don't have that much to talk about. We expect from this group today, you will also have interests in the sort of mundane parts of our lives, and you will also, without doubt, bring out some questions about some of the more unusual things that happened in our lives. But we are here because we're going to learn something from each other. I expect to be considerably more knowledgeable when I go home about my relationship with my brothers. And I also expect that you people will have more answers to the things that are of interest to you. So that's my introduction. I'd like to start a little bit by seeing what Norman and Walter can comment about the unusual relationship between our mother, Frida, and our father. Normie, how would you describe, why don't we have you describe your mother, and why don't we have you describe your father?
Yeah, just let me preface that with one thing. You know what's going to come out of this? We're going to make a bunch of cards with Trivial Pursuit questions.
That's right.
Okay. And you better know the answers.
Okay, you want me to start with Muti?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always had, well, first of all, my recollection is always both Papa and Muti having the utmost respect for each other, even though they would differ, definitely differ on ideas of what to do about this or what to do about that. There was never a personal criticism, a recognition of a difference of method or what to do about something. But personal, no. To their dying day, there was real respect for the other. Yeah. Muti was a very sensitive, gentle, but could be very strong person. Sensitive, gentle, caring, philanthropic, all this sort of thing. But I remember when I was racing motorcycles in college, and Harry Asby had that Ariel that I was riding very successfully. And Muti came to
Square
Lance.
Ariel? No, it was a single red
500.
500 Red Hunter.
Yeah. And Mutti came to Lansing, East Lansing, and she met me, and she met Harry. And she told Harry, you know, this is very nice that you're helping Norman be successful in motorcycle racing. He enjoys it, all that sort of thing. But you know, Harry, if he has an accident and is killed, you are the one that will have to tell me. That was the end of my motorcycle racing. I remember her in Germany at the end of the war, working with refugees and working with meetings between students when we still had the American military government, the British military government, and we had the German government coming up in 1949. Mutti was German-born. She always had a German accent. She was accepted by the Germans as being one of them, could understand their view, could interpret their view. She was recognized and accepted by the Americans because she had lived over here long enough that the Americans knew that she knew the way they were thinking. And she played a very vital role in negotiation and getting the two sides to really understand what the other side felt. Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment along that line. Mutti, as Norm says, was born in Germany. She studied nursing. She became a qualified nurse in Germany prior to World War I, and then came to the United States.
At a time when the nursing profession for women was still an unusual thing.
Yeah.
Not many women studied to become
And
nurses.
it was sort of a social obligation. The people from better families would go into nursing as almost a charitable type of thing. You know?
They were called a Krankenschwester,
Yep.
a sister for the
sick.
For the sick, yeah.
Yeah.
Similar to the sense of the nuns and the ones who go into nunneries and become sisters within a nunnery. So a Krankenschwester in German, the term for a nurse, was associated quite closely with those who gave their service to become nuns.
She had an older sister, Gisela, and she had a younger sister and brother, Gilda and
Twins.
Hans, who were twins. We lived in Muskegon, and we had neighbors in our summer cottage down at Mona Lake. Von Moltke, of the
Moltke.
famous military Von Moltke family. And he was very pro-Hitler. This was 1934. If I can remember the grill on the front of the Ford automobile, it seems to me that was a 1934 automobile grill. And I remember one day, Mutti was out in the backyard hanging up the laundry, and Graf von Moltke was out sweeping off his back porch. And his voice, he was a very fine gentleman, but his voice started to go up. And of all things, my mother's voice went up, started to go up. And I knew they were arguing. And what they were arguing, in German, oh yes, in German. And what they were arguing about was Hitler and the Nazis. And already in 34, Mutti knew what was wrong with Nazis and Hitler. And I was afraid Count von Moltke was going to hit my mother with the broom. So I went into our house, and in those days, people on the party line, if you called each other, you would ring 100, and then the fourth digit of your party line and the fourth digit of their party line, and you would hang up your phone. Both phones would ring, and when the phone stopped ringing, you knew the other party had answered, and then you would pick it up and talk to your neighbor. So I went in and dialed 100 and our fourth digit twice. So the only phone that rang was our own. I let the phone ring twice, and then I ran out and I said, Mutti, telephone. And when she came in, I said, that wasn't a phone. I was afraid Count Pamulka was going to hit with his broom. That is a story of Mutti. Do you have anything to add on Mutti or
Oh,
on
yes.
Papa?
Yes, well, I should give a bit of the background. Her father was from a military family, which went back I don't know how many generations, but they were in the service of the Kaiser, and it was the tradition in the family that the sons were expected to dedicate their lives to military careers. And the reason she was born in Mainz was because the father was the military commander for the garrison in Mainz. And that later she went to school in Wetzlar was because he was shifted to Wetzlar. And that's where she described going to school and looking up in the windows of the factory of the Lights family in Wetzlar and seeing the master
Opticians.
craftsmen who were grinding camera lenses, and those were done by hand, and they would be in the windows where they could get the light so that they could, as they were
But
perfecting.
the reason you do that is you put your polished optic on a test plate and you look at the fringes of light.
The
which will-
rainbows. Yeah.
Rainbows, which will tell you the accuracy of your curvature.
No, so I
That's
learned
why they were
something.
by the window.
I learned something. And so then he was moved to Goslar, and that's where she went to school. And who's here? Neither. You were there, and Kathy and Susie were there. But Frida's, Mutti's younger sister, Hilda, we visited her in, what was it, 1971, 1972?
I was 8 or 9 years old, that's all I know.
Okay, well, you figure it out. So
73.
you can count on your fingers. Good. No, you're not that old. And she took us to the plaza in Goslar, which is an old town, which has been fortunately very much respected, and the old buildings have not been replaced by modern concrete and so forth. And there's the plaza or the central square, and there's a fountain in the square, and with a little sort of eagle on the top of the fountain. And Mutti had told this story to us, and I remembered it, but then her little sister repeated it and took us to this plaza and said that she remembered. No, their father, Ferdinand, had described...
My middle name, Ferdinand.
Had described how he remembered as a kid that he was standing holding on to his father's trousers, and the crowd had gathered around, and it was a militant, rebellious crowd. This was just pretty much at the time of the publication of the Communist Manifesto, and there was revolutionary unrest, social unrest in a lot of Europe, but particularly in Germany at that point. And the crowd was there to intent on overthrowing the Kaiser's government. And he stood there, their father stood and spoke to the crowd and reasoned with them. And at the end of his talking with them, they went home peacefully. And that was a memory that was engraved in his mind from when he was a small child. And so it was our aunt who took us to stand by the same fountain, and we could visualize that bit of history that had taken place that must have been late 1840s, something like that. So just the tying history together. But so she went from that background to where they had military servants in the house. Her father, as a military commander, had one man to take care of the horses and another as the butler.
And the butler used to have to help him get his boots on and off.
Yeah.
Remember, that was the
That
job of
was
the
one
butler.
of the butler's job to keep the boots.
Riding
on.
boots.
So she came from the class of the old aristocracy, and her father was one of 10 sons, and all of the 10 sons were in the military, and it goes on back, and the family history, which somebody picked up,
Yes,
and it's
right there.
on a sheet of paper, but it goes back to Clemens Soest in 1708, who founded or initiated a scholarship foundation for Soest descendants, and in the inflation of right after World War I, that was pretty well wiped out. But Monty thought that when I was thinking of going over to Europe to study in 1939, with reactivation of the economy under Hitler and so forth, some of that fund might have been regenerated and might be available for studying in Göttingen, which it so happens right now, quite aside from all of this, that Kathy's daughter, Julia, is toying with the possibility of
Emilia.
no, Julia
Oh,
is toying
okay.
with the possibility of getting into school in Göttingen, and she didn't realize. So anyway, but going from that background, that she when she was a young woman, decided that she wanted to live a useful life, and she went into did the unusual thing, particularly for somebody of those family circumstances, of instead of marrying some gallant young military officer, she went to medical school, nursing school, and volunteered to work. At that time, tuberculosis was one of the major scourges of European society, and the only known cure for tuberculosis at that time was to take people to homes where they could be cured close to the sea, and the German medical service maintained a tuberculosis sanatorium in Genoa, in Italy, where they could breathe the salt air, and the chlorine in the salt air was the only known treatment for tuberculosis, and she worked there.
And that was with Dr. Schneegans.
Yeah, who was from Snegans, the snow goose.
Yeah.
That's right.
The
I've
Dr.
forgotten
Snake.
about his name. And among one of the things that she was, well, in a sense, philosophically bitter about, when everybody in the hospital who was all of the personnel who were dealing with working and having contact with these patients with tuberculosis, they tested them every year for an annual scan for tuberculosis. And when she went up for tuberculosis, the doctor took one look at her and said, "Well, you're so healthy," and he sent her on without the test. And a couple of months later, she came down with tuberculosis, and she gave herself a limited time to get cured, or she was still going to give up. But fortunately, she was cured. But all of her life, she still had scarred tissue in her lungs from that one bout of tuberculosis that she had.
But she died in her 90th year in your arms.
Yeah.
In 1975, in
and
your
so-
arms, out at the farm.
Yeah. So she went from that. She was interested in in the new field of medicine, which was psychiatry, and worked with Dr. Schneegans then in Switzerland, and that was when, if I'm not wrong, Dr. Jung was
Yeah.
a Swiss.
She worked with Dr. Hinkle.
No, but that was later, in Switzerland.
Yeah, in Switzerland.
Switzerland, she had the first contacts with people who were in this new and exciting field of study of not what happens in the, you know, in the liver and the lungs, but what happens in the mind. And Freud and Jung were the two, you know, great pioneers of psychiatry. And so she heard about this woman physician, Dr. Beatrice M. Hinkle in New York, who was translating Jung into English. And so she decided to go, and she had some opportunity to go and work in the United States. And she thought that would be her opportunity to have an introduction and breakthrough into psychiatry. And from that, she did that, and this was saying goodbye to her folks. She'd be back in 2 years, and in less than 2 years, World War I broke out, and she never saw her parents again. And that was something I thought about later on when World War II came, and I took off to Europe, and I took off to Europe, and then the war started, and she couldn't help but wonder whether she was ever going to see me again, because, you know, sort of that fate was going to pay her out for having run out on her parents, that I had run out, and she wouldn't see me again, and she must have really suffered with that until I finally got back. It was a year or so. But she went from living at that level to, with Beatrice Hinkle, had a summer place up in Connecticut, in, what was it, Litchfield, Washington Depot. Washington Depot. A big old 2.5-story house on a high piece of land in outside of Litchfield, and she would invite her patients to come up there during vacation, and she would consult and give their patients consultations every day, and they still live in this one family circle. And so this had been going on before we were born. And one Christmas, she was invited, Monty was invited up, and there was a young man who had been invited to the same gathering, and that was our father. And Beatrice Hinkle, she was playing Cupid, and put them together, and it worked. And I think I got married. The reason she did that was because our father had, when it was, not many people traveled from the U.S. to Europe, unless you were, Thomas Jefferson or somebody who was going on a diplomatic post. But 99% of the traffic was Europe to the United States and never returned. And he came from a family that had been in the United States back into the 1600s, and that he went to Europe because he was interested in automobiles and interested in, he was importing Mercedes-Benz. He was interested in what the automobile industry was doing, and he also enjoyed skiing in St. Moritz in Switzerland. And so Dr. Hinkle was aware of his interest and admiration for German technology, and so she brought the two together, and it clicked, and they got married. So that was, any other points that you fill in on that?
Yeah, as to what's going on right now, my father was an early photographer. In fact, one year for Christmas, I got an orange crate of 5x7 and 8x10 glass plates that he had taken in Europe before World War I, and had never gotten around to print them, to make prints of them. And
in color?
No, black and white.
Black and white.
Black and white. And
but he did work with color photography way back then.
He worked a little bit, with color then. But he did these black and whites, and so every day after school, I would duck over to a friend's house and print up maybe 10 or 15 of these plates and get them washed and dried and get home and not be noticed that I was coming home late from school. And for Christmas, I gave him 2 photo albums full of those pictures that he had taken in Germany, Switzerland, Greece, Italy, all around there. And for a month or more, every evening, my mother and he and I would sit down, and he would tell us the story about every one of those pictures.
Now, that's news to me. I for years remember those heavy crates,
Of glass plates.
glass plates, first in the little,
In Tonoletti's house.
yeah, and in the front room, which was more or less his office but it had no heat. And as you went into the house on the right-hand side, and those boxes there, and then we moved them. I've forgotten where they were stored out at Lake, no, at Pentaluma and so on.
Yeah.
And I always thought, well, what a pity that those boxes of plates were lost, because they would be worth a lot of money. I had no idea that anybody had done anything with them,
Yeah.
because
Well
that took place after I'd gone off to college, and I lost track of what was going on in the home. So I now feel at ease on that particular subject.
Okay, we've been talking, we started out talking about Frida,
Yeah.
Mutti, our mother, and we have brought Frank, her
Yeah.
husband, into this. Let me now fill in a little bit on Frank.
Let me just check one playback to that, is that after they got married and they lived in Detroit for a while, and then they went to Chicago, because the University of Chicago then was like the Berkeley of the 60s, University of Chicago. Robert Hutchins was the shining light of the young intellectual leadership of the United States, and drew a whole circle of intellectual community around him. And they were in Chicago, and were there. The interest and excitement in their lives was being in contact with the people of the intellectual group around Robert Hutchins in the University of Chicago. But when this guy came along and started having breathing problems and respiratory problems, and they couldn't cure them one way or another, and they went for summer vacation, invited by a friend who had a school teacher friend who had a country home out on the edge of Lake Michigan in Muskegon, and invited up there, and took the 2-day drive up to Muskegon to spend the summer there, and decided 2 weeks his lungs cleared up. And so they...
You're talking about me?
You.
All news to me. All news to me. Keep going.
Now you learned something.
I'm listening.
And so they went back and packed up all of their stuff in Chicago, and said goodbye to all of their friends. It was a 2-day drive to get from Muskegon back down to Chicago, and they went and they managed to rent the house from the Barber family.
Yes.
And which was a lot better house than Letty Snively's had.
It was winterized.
It was somewhat winterized, but it still had the pump outdoors, and it did have a garage, and it did have a good fireplace in the main front room, but you still had to carry a kerosene stove out to the outhouse to keep the outhouse warm at night. And Mutti was then well,
The smell of the
I was
kerosene
coming
lamp
along.
was stronger than the rest of the smell of the outhouse. I remember that.
and he was to be born in December, and the snow came, and our father had to be off in Chicago to take care of business, and she was there, and there was no butler, and there were no maids, and there was nothing, and she had to struggle on the icy walk to get the kerosene lamp out to the outhouse, and all the else to live under those conditions. And
You were
so
referring to
that
Norman being born.
yeah, Normie was going to be born. Yeah, and that was, now we look back. I mean, then it was natural. Well, sure, here's where we are. Here's where we live. And Mutti does this, and Papa does that. But when you look back now, and thinking of where she had started her life, and what she was up against, and you talk about her being strong. She was strong. And then I went to school, and there were because I was due to be enrolled in school. I was 6 years old, and turned out that there was one teacher, an old lady niece, and she had one schoolroom with 40 kids, and she was teaching 8 grades. And Mutti decided that I could learn more by staying at home. It was a 1.5 mile walk to school anyway, and through the snow, and so I got my first year of schooling at home, which she also did, besides taking care of the other children.
Oh, one little point here. Mutti's father, of course, was German. Her mother was French. You remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Charlotte.